Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a quick moment to say how incredibly grateful I am for all your support on this channel. We're pushing towards our goal of 10k subscribers by next year, and everyone who likes, comments and subscribes helps us get there. You all are truly awesome. Now let's dive into today's video. The file sits on my desktop, innocently labelled ak_final_recording.wav. My hands shake as I press play for what must be the 100th time, hoping to catch something new, something I might have missed. The quality is poor, a mix of static and what sounds like wind, but Dr. Catherine Walsh's voice cuts through it all, her usual professional composure shattered by raw fear. This is Dr. Catherine Walsh, Head of Geological Studies at Station Omega. The time is 3:47 AM, Friday, December 15th. If anyone receives this, if anyone's still alive to receive this, stay away from the coordinates I'm about to transmit. We were wrong. God help us, we were so wrong. The recording crackles, and I can hear alarms blaring in the background. Someone is shouting in the distance, their words indistinguishable through what sounds like metal being torn apart. The readings we detected weren't from thermal vents. The heat signatures, they're moving. The permafrost is melting too fast. Containment protocols have failed. Dr. Erickson is dead. Half the research team is... Her voice breaks and there's a sound of papers shuffling frantically. Listen carefully. Everything you know about Area 51 is a lie. It was never about Nevada. They wanted us looking at the desert while they were hiding the truth up here. The real site, the real discovery, it's all been here in Alaska since... A thunderous crack interrupts her, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Walsh swears, her voice moving away from the microphone. No, no, no. The seals are rupturing. The backup generators aren't responding. They're getting through the lower levels. The next part always makes my blood run cold. In the background, beneath the chaos, there's a sound that doesn't belong in our world. A high-pitched, oscillating screech that makes the recording distort. It's followed by what I can only describe as a deep, wet, rumbling growl that seems to come from something impossibly large. The coordinates are... Walsh's voice is drowned out by the sound of tearing metal. The screeching gets louder, closer. If anyone finds this, destroy the facility. Destroy everything. It has to stay buried. What we found, what they've been keeping here, it was never meant to. The recording ends there. It always ends there, cutting off into static before going silent. But that's not where the story ends. That's where it begins. I found this recording 6 months ago, and it set me on a path I couldn't turn back from. My name is Dr. James Cooper, and I'm going to tell you what really happened at Station Omega, about what's really buried in the Alaskan wilderness, about why hundreds of people had to die to keep it secret. But first I need to go back to when I thought I was just a geologist doing his job, back to when I believed Area 51 was the biggest secret our government was keeping. Back to when I still slept through the night without hearing that inhuman screech in my dreams. It started with an envelope, no return address, no name, just a set of coordinates and a warning from my old mentor that would drag me into the darkest conspiracy in human history. The envelope arrived on a frostbitten Monday morning in October. No postmark, no return address. Just my name and office location written in a shaky hand I hadn't seen in 3 years. I recognized Dr. Thomas Harrison's handwriting immediately, though it lacked his usual precise strokes. The last time I'd heard from my old mentor, he'd been heading to Alaska for what he called a career-defining research opportunity. Then he vanished, like so many others who ventured too far into that vast wilderness. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, yellowed and creased, with coordinates scrawled in the center. 60 degrees, 47 minutes north latitude, 148 degrees, 23 minutes west longitude. Below them, a message that would haunt me. They wanted us looking at the desert while they hide the truth in the ice. James, finish what I started, but trust no one. I remember sitting in my cramped university office, surrounded by core samples and geological surveys, staring at those numbers until they burned into my memory. Harrison had been my mentor, my friend, the man who guided me through my doctorate in geological sciences. He wasn't prone to dramatics or conspiracy theories. If he sent this, he had a reason. The coordinates pointed to a location 127 miles southeast of Anchorage, in a region marked on maps as restricted watershed. But when I cross-referenced historical surveys, something didn't add up. The area had been designated for mining surveys in the 1940s, then abruptly sealed off in 1947, the same year as the Roswell incident. The timing made my skin crawl. I spent weeks digging through public records, calling in favors from colleagues, piecing together fragments of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. The area had a history of strange phenomena, unexplained seismic activity that didn't match any known fault patterns, unusual atmospheric disturbances that interfered with equipment, and most disturbing of all, people who ventured too close simply disappeared. Local indigenous communities had legends about the region dating back generations. They called it the place of long sleep and warned about disturbing what lay beneath the ice. Their stories spoke of lights in the sky, of the ground trembling with the movements of ancient beings, of people who went into the mountains and returned, changed. But it was the government records that truly caught my attention. Under layers of bureaucratic paperwork and misdirection, I found evidence of massive funding diversions. Billions of dollars filtered through a maze of shell organizations and classified projects, all leading to that same region. The paper trail was hidden behind innocuous names: Atmospheric Research Initiative, Permafrost Impact Study, Deep Earth Sampling Project. I created a timeline on my office wall, connecting documents with red string like some cliché conspiracy theorist. But the pattern was undeniable. Every major UFO incident, every highly publicized alien encounter of the past 70 years corresponded with increased activity and funding in that region of Alaska. Area 51 had all the spotlight, all the rumors, while something far bigger operated in the shadows of the north. One name kept appearing in heavily redacted documents: Project Prometheus. No details, just requisition orders for advanced equipment, ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging systems, containment materials rated for extreme pressures and temperatures, the kind of equipment you'd need if you were studying something deep underground, or trying to keep something down there. I was close to something. Too close, apparently. 3 weeks after receiving Harrison's letter, I noticed the unmarked cars outside my apartment, men in suits watching from a distance. My phone began making strange clicks during calls. My emails arrived with odd delays. Then came the warning. A simple note on my windshield: stop looking. But I couldn't stop. Harrison was still out there somewhere, and whatever he'd found in Alaska had scared him enough to reach out after 3 years of silence. I had a choice to make. I could walk away, forget the coordinates, go back to my comfortable academic life studying rock formations and writing papers. Or I could pull on the thread Harrison had left me, even if it unraveled everything I thought I knew about the world. The next morning, I booked a flight to Anchorage. But first, I needed a team. People with the right skills, people I could trust. Because Harrison was right about one thing. Whatever waited in the ice, I couldn't face it alone. Building a team would have to wait. First, I needed proof. Something concrete that I could use to convince others to risk their careers, maybe their lives, on what sounded like a madman's conspiracy theory. The deeper I dug into Project Prometheus, the stranger things became. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely source: weather reports. Decades of meteorological data showed inexplicable temperature anomalies in the region, perfect circles of warmth in the middle of Alaska's brutal winters. The patterns were too regular to be natural, suggesting massive amounts of heat emanating from underground. I called Dr. Rebecca Frost, an old colleague who specialized in atmospheric sciences. After an hour of dodging her questions about why I needed classified weather data, she sent me something interesting: satellite thermal imaging showing what appeared to be a massive heat bloom under the ice, exactly at Harrison's coordinates. "You need to see this," she wrote in her encrypted email. "I've been tracking similar patterns for years. Whatever's generating that heat, it's getting warmer. The permafrost is melting faster than it should be." The government documents were harder to access, but I had an ace up my sleeve. My father, before he died, had been a mid-level bureaucrat in the Department of Energy. His old passwords still worked on some archive systems, an oversight that gave me access to files I was never meant to see. Project Prometheus wasn't just one facility, it was a network of them built into Alaska's remote mountains. The official records claimed they were decommissioned in 1978, but power consumption data told a different story. Someone was still running massive equipment down there, drawing enough electricity to power a small city. In a heavily encrypted folder labelled Historical Records, PP Initial Discovery, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photograph from 1947, taken by a geological survey team. The black and white image showed what looked like a cave entrance, but the dimensions were wrong. The walls were too smooth, too regular, and carved into the rock above the entrance were symbols unlike any known human writing system. The file included a preliminary translation attempt, prison or possibly tomb. But it was the indigenous historical records that truly shook me. Generations of oral histories spoke of the Great Sealing, when their ancestors helped beings from above imprison something that had awakened in the earth. The same stories appeared across different tribes, all pointing to the same time period, roughly 300 million years ago. I traced shipping manifests, supply routes, disguised as mining operations. Everything pointed to ongoing activity. In the past year alone, they'd brought in enough concrete and steel to build a skyscraper, all transported under the cover of darkness on unmarked trucks. Then I found the personnel files. Hundreds of scientists, researchers, and military personnel cycled through Project Prometheus since its inception. Many disappeared, listed as transferred or retired. But when I cross-referenced their social security numbers, a pattern emerged. No further records existed for any of them after their time at the facility. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. Dr. Harrison's file was among them. His status, indefinite assignment, Special Research Division. The last dated entry was from 3 years ago, the day before he disappeared. His final report contained just one line: "It's waking up." I compiled everything onto an encrypted hard drive. Photos, documents, thermal scans, indigenous accounts, personnel records. If anything happened to me, there would be evidence. But the most damning proof came from cross-referencing seismic data. Every major UFO incident at Area 51 coincided perfectly with massive underground activity in Alaska. They were creating distractions, staging elaborate shows in the desert to keep eyes away from what was really happening in the north. As I stared at my wall of evidence at 3 a.m, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Stop digging, Dr. Cooper." The voice was cold, professional. Some doors are meant to stay closed. I hung up, my hands shaking. They knew what I was doing. Time was running out. I needed to move fast, to get to Alaska before they could stop me. But first I had to convince the right people to help me. I started making calls. Finding the right team wasn't easy. Most people I approached hung up the moment I mentioned Alaska or laughed off my evidence as elaborate hoaxes. But 3 people listened. 3 people saw what I saw in the data. Dr. Rebecca Frost was the first to commit. Her expertise in atmospheric sciences had already led her to similar questions about the region. Those heat signatures aren't natural, she told me over a secure video call, and they're growing. Whatever's down there is becoming more active. Michael Torres came next. Ex-military, special forces with experience in Arctic operations. He'd been stationed near the coordinates in 2019, tasked with turning away unauthorized personnel from what he was told was a weather research station. I saw things out there, he said when I showed him the files. Things that kept me up at night. Command said it was the Northern Lights playing tricks, but Northern Lights don't make sounds like that. David Wright was different. A local guide who'd lived in Alaska his entire life. He knew every mountain pass and hidden valley within 100 miles of our target. More importantly, he knew the legends. His grandmother was native to the region, and her stories about the place of long sleep matched our historical records too perfectly to ignore. We met in a small diner in Anchorage, the kind of place where conversations get lost in the clatter of plates and coffee cups. It was 4:30 a.m., and the December darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing. The official site is here, I said, spreading a map across the sticky table. But there's a maintenance entrance through an old mining tunnel that security doesn't watch as closely. David found it. David nodded, tracing the route with his finger. My grandfather used to tell me about these tunnels. Said they were here long before the miners, that his people sealed them ages ago. Some of the markings on the walls, they're not from any known civilization. Rebecca studied the thermal imaging printouts. The heat blooms are intensifying. Whatever's generating them is becoming more active. If we're going to do this, it needs to be soon. Torres leaned back, his military training evident in his posture. Security will be tight, even at the backup entrance. I did recon last week. They're bringing in new equipment, lots of it. Something's got them spooked. We go in as a geological survey team, I explained, passing out forged credentials that had cost me nearly everything I owned. David's company is legitimate and contracted for mineral studies in the area. As far as anyone knows, we're just scientists checking permafrost stability. And if we find something, Rebecca asked quietly, if all of this is real? We document everything, I said firmly. Multiple cameras, sensors, samples. The world needs to know what they've been hiding up here. What Harrison found that made him disappear. Torres checked his watch. Sunrise in a few hours. The next security shift change is at 7 a.m. That's our window. We spent the next hour going over equipment and contingencies. Each of us carried a small satellite beacon. If we got separated, we could signal for help. Not the help would likely come in time, given where we were heading. As we loaded our gear into David's heavy-duty research vehicles, I caught him staring at the mountains, his expression troubled. Something wrong? I asked. My grandmother had one more story, he said softly, about why her people helped seal those tunnels. She said they contained something that should never see daylight again. Something that was old when the first humans walked the earth. Did she say what it was? He shook his head. Only that it dreamed of walking the surface again, and that its dreams were getting stronger. The drive took us through increasingly remote territory. Cell service disappeared. GPS signals became unreliable. The only sound was the crunch of tires on frozen ground and the howl of Arctic wind. 2 hours in, all of our equipment began malfunctioning. Compass needles spun wildly. Radio static filled every frequency. Even our watches started running backward. We're getting close, Torres said grimly. I've seen this before. Through the swirling snow, I saw it, a glint of metal in the mountainside, camouflaged but unmistakable, the entrance to a facility that officially didn't exist. And somewhere below, in the ancient dark, something was waiting. The maintenance tunnel looked harmless enough at first, just another abandoned mining shaft carved into the mountainside. But as soon as we stepped inside, the temperature shifted. Despite the brutal Alaskan cold outside, the air grew noticeably warmer. "Check this out," Rebecca whispered, running her hand along the wall. What looked like rough-hewn rock from a distance was actually smooth to the touch, with faint patterns that didn't match any natural geological formation. This wasn't made by miners. Torres took point, his military training evident in every movement. Our headlamps cast jumping shadows as we moved deeper into the tunnel. After about 50 yards, the passage changed dramatically. The natural rock gave way to manufactured surfaces, steel and concrete, decades old but still solid. "Hold up," David said, his voice tense. He pointed to the floor. "Look at the dust patterns." I saw what he meant. Despite the facility being supposedly abandoned, there were clear signs of recent foot traffic. A lot of it. We reached a heavy security door, the kind you'd find in a nuclear bunker. It should have been locked. It wasn't. "This isn't right," Torres muttered, examining the electronic keypad. "Power's still on, but security's disabled. Something's happened here recently." Beyond the door, we found ourselves in a vast underground complex. The walls were lined with conduits and pipes, all thrumming with active power. Fluorescent lights flickered automatically as we moved through the corridors, motion sensors, still functioning after all these years. "This place is massive," Rebecca breathed, checking her instruments. "The thermal readings are off the scale. Whatever's generating that heat, it's below us." We passed through laboratories filled with abandoned equipment, offices with papers still scattered across desks, as if the occupants had left in a hurry. The deeper we went, the more modern the facilities became. This place hadn't been abandoned at all. It had been continuously upgraded and expanded. In what looked like a recent research station, we found a computer still running. While Rebecca worked on accessing its files, I examined a wall of monitoring equipment. Dozens of screens showed real-time data, seismic activity, temperature readings, radiation levels, and something labelled simply as entity status. "Guys," David called out, his voice shaking. He stood before a massive window overlooking a lower chamber. "You need to see this." The window looked down into an enormous cavern, easily several hundred feet high. But it wasn't natural. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols we'd seen in the old photographs. And in the center... "Oh my God," Rebecca whispered. In the center of the cavern was a structure that defied explanation. A perfect black cube, each side at least 50 feet long, suspended in a web of cables and scaffolding. The air around it seemed to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But it wasn't heat distorting the air. It was something else, something that made my eyes hurt to look at directly. "I've got the files," Rebecca said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "This facility, it's not just for research. It's a containment site. That cube, it's not a structure, it's a container. And according to these readings, whatever's inside is becoming active." Torres cursed softly. "Movement in the lower levels. Security teams. They know we're here." "Wait," I said, something catching my eye on one of the monitors. "Look at the date stamps on these readings. The activity levels, they're spiking, growing exponentially over the past 3 years." That's when the alarms began to sound. And deep below, something answered them with a sound that no human throat could make. The alarms screamed through the facility, but they weren't security alerts. These were different. Evacuation warnings. Red emergency lights began pulsing along the corridors, casting everything in a bloody glow. "Containment breach in progress," an automated voice announced calmly. All personnel proceed to emergency exits. This is not a drill. We need to move, Torres urged, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the monitors. The black cube was vibrating now, sending ripples through the air around it. The readings were going crazy, energy levels climbing beyond what the sensors could measure. Wait, Rebecca said, still at the computer. I'm copying everything I can. These files, they're incredible. Project Prometheus wasn't started in 1947. That's just when they found it again. She pulled up document after document, classified files dating back to the facility's inception. The truth was more staggering than anything we'd imagined. The cube had been discovered multiple times throughout human history. Ancient civilizations had built structures around it, tried to study it, contain it. Each time something went wrong. Each time they had to seal it away again. Look at this, she pointed to a series of photographs. They showed cave paintings, hieroglyphics, ancient texts, all depicting the same cubic structure. Every major civilization knew about it. They all tried to understand it, and they all failed. The file continued. In 1947, what crashed in Roswell wasn't an alien spacecraft. It was a probe sent by something else, something that had detected the cube becoming active again. The government followed the probe's signal to Alaska, where they found what previous civilizations had left behind. All the UFO sightings, all the conspiracy theories about Area 51. They were engineered to hide this. It gets worse, Rebecca said, her voice shaking. According to these notes, the cube isn't technology. It's biological. It's an egg. The floor shuddered beneath our feet. On the monitors, we could see the cavern below filling with gas as emergency containment protocols activated. But the cube was changing. Its perfect surface had begun to ripple and shift. More from the files, she continued, downloading frantically as warnings flashed across the screen. They found something in the ice near the cube, preserved specimens of what came out the last time it opened. The dating put them at over 300 million years old. They weren't like anything on Earth. They were just the larvae stage. An explosion rocked the facility. Through the window, we saw part of the containment scaffolding collapse. The cube was pulsing now, a deep red glow emanating from within. That's why the heat's been increasing, David realized. It's not breaking free. It's hatching. Torres grabbed the hard drive as soon as the download finished. We have what we came for. We need to go. Now. But as we turned to leave, we found we weren't alone. A figure stood in the doorway. Gaunt. Haunted looking. But familiar. Dr. Harrison? I whispered. My old mentor smiled sadly. I was wondering when you'd finally make it, James, but you're too late. We're all too late. Behind him, the cube began to crack. Harrison looked like a ghost of his former self. His once black hair had gone completely white, and his eyes held a haunted look I'd never seen before. Deep scars ran along the left side of his face, disappearing beneath his collar. 3 years, he said, his voice hoarse. 3 years I've been down here, watching, waiting, trying to stop what's coming. But some things can't be stopped, James. They can only be delayed. Another tremor shook the facility. Through the window, we could see pieces of the cube falling away like black eggshell, revealing pulsing, iridescent material beneath. What is it? I asked. What's inside? Something old, Harrison replied. Something that was here before us. Before everything. We thought we were so clever, finding it, studying it, but we were never the ones in control. It was waiting, growing, dreaming. He led us quickly through a series of security doors using clearances I didn't know he had. We emerged in what looked like a massive archive room. The walls were lined with specimens in preservation tanks, things that defied description. Creatures that looked like crosses between insects and sea life, but scaled up to impossible sizes. These are just the workers, Harrison explained, pointing to the specimens. Like ants to a queen. They came first, preparing the way. But what's in that cube? That's something else entirely. Rebecca was examining data readouts on a central console. These biological samples. The DNA structure is unlike anything on Earth. The complexity, it's orders of magnitude beyond anything we've ever seen. Because they're not from Earth, Harrison said. At least, not originally. They came here millions of years ago, seeded the planet with their genetic material. Everything that evolved here, every living thing, we all carry traces of their code. We're all part of their experiment. Torres, who'd been watching the door, suddenly stiffened. Movement in the corridors. Security teams closing in. Not security, Harrison said grimly. The workers are loose. The containment failures weren't an accident. They've been releasing themselves, preparing for what's coming. Through the archives windows, we could see into other research chambers. More specimens, but these were different. They looked almost human, but wrong, distorted. Failed experiments, Harrison explained, following my gaze. They've been trying to create hybrids, preparing bodies that can survive both here and wherever they came from. The facility's lights flickered and the emergency generators kicked in with a roar. On the monitors, we could see the cube continuing to crack apart. Something vast and dark was moving inside. Why now? I asked. Why is it hatching after all this time? Harrison's face was grim. Climate change, the warming ice. We thought we were just killing ourselves with greenhouse gases, but we were helping them. They need a warmer world to thrive. Everything that's happening to our planet, it's making it perfect for them. A screech echoed through the facility, the same sound from Dr. Walsh's recording. But this time, it was answered by dozens of others. They're coming, Harrison said, pulling out a key card. But there's something you need to see first. The real truth about what we found here. He swiped the card on a hidden panel, revealing a heavy door marked Original Discovery, 1947. After this, he said, nothing will ever be the same. The room beyond the door was different from everything else we'd seen. While the rest of the facility was sterile and modern, this chamber looked ancient. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols we'd seen outside, but here they were pristine, undamaged by time. This is where it all started, Harrison said, approaching a central pedestal. Not in 1947, but millions of years ago, when they first arrived. The pedestal held what looked like a stone tablet, but the material was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Embedded in its surface was a crystalline structure that pulsed with a faint, internal glow. A message, Harrison explained, left by the last civilization that tried to contain them. We've spent decades trying to translate it completely, but the parts we understand, they're terrifying. Before he could continue, the facility shuddered violently. Emergency lights flashed as more alarms joined the cacophony. Multiple containment breaches, the automated system announced. All personnel evacuate immediately. Emergency protocols engaged. Through the observation windows, we could see chaos erupting in the lower levels. Dark shapes moved with impossible speed through the corridors. Security teams fired uselessly at creatures that shrugged off bullets like rain. They're not trying to kill anyone, Harrison said quietly. They're collecting, gathering specimens, test subjects. Rebecca was still studying the tablet. These symbols, they're not just writing, they're molecular structures, DNA sequences. Yes, Harrison nodded. The message isn't just in the language, it's in the genetic code itself. They wrote their instructions into the building blocks of life. Every living thing on Earth carries fragments of their message. Another explosion rocked the facility. On the monitors, we could see the cube had split completely open. Something massive was emerging. a shape that seemed to shift and change as it moved, defying our eyes' attempts to understand it. "What we found," Harrison continued, his voice shaking. "What we thought was just an artifact. It's a Genesis device, a machine for rewriting life itself. And now it's awake." Torres was barricading the door, but we could hear sounds in the corridor outside, chittering noises and the scratch of claws on metal. "The specimens," David said suddenly, pointing to the screens. "They're all moving towards the cube, like they're being called." Harrison nodded grimly. "Because they are. Everything they've created, every experiment, every hybrid, they're all connected to the central intelligence. And now it's calling its children home." The tablet's glow was intensifying, pulsing in sync with the tremors shaking the facility. "The previous civilization," Harrison said, "the ones who left this warning, they found a way to put the creature into a dormant state, to seal it away before its work was complete. But they knew it wouldn't last forever. That's what this place was built for, not just to contain it, but to warn whoever came after, to give us a chance to stop it when it finally awoke." "How?" I asked. "How do we stop something like this?" Harrison opened his mouth to answer, but froze as a new sound filled the air. A deep, resonant pulse that seemed to vibrate in our bones. On every screen we could see the massive shape from the cube, rising, unfurling appendages that shouldn't have been able to exist in three-dimensional space. "It's too late," Harrison whispered. "The Queen is awake." The Queen, if that's what it truly was, defied comprehension. Looking at it directly caused physical pain, as if our brains couldn't process what our eyes were seeing. It moved like liquid smoke, its form constantly shifting between states of matter that shouldn't have been possible. "Everything we know about Area 51, Harrison said, his voice barely audible over the facility's groaning metal. "Every alien conspiracy theory, every UFO sighting, it was all engineered. A decades-long smokescreen to hide this, because they knew if people found out the truth, there would be global panic." The truth was far worse than any UFO conspiracy. The creatures weren't visitors from another planet. They were Earth's original inhabitants, seeding the planet with their genetic material billions of years ago, waiting for the right conditions to return. "The Ice Age wasn't natural," Harrison continued, pulling up ancient data on a nearby console. "It was deliberately triggered by the last civilization to face them. They knew they couldn't destroy the Queen, so they changed the planet's climate, making it too cold for the creatures to thrive. They buried the Genesis device in ice and left warnings for whoever would find it next." Rebecca was still studying the tablet, her face pale. "These genetic sequences, they're not just messages, they're activation codes. Everything on Earth that evolved from their original seeding, it can be rewritten, reconverted back to its original form." That's what all the experiments were for, I realized. They weren't trying to create human-alien hybrids. They were trying to find a way to prevent the reconversion. Torres, who had been watching the security feeds, suddenly cursed. "We've got movement. Lots of it. Everything preserved in the facility. It's changing." On the screens we could see preserved specimens, literally transforming, their cellular structure reorganizing in response to some unseen signal. Even dead tissue was reacting, reconstructing itself into new forms. "The Queen is calling all her children home," Harrison said. "Every living thing that carries even a fragment of their original genetic code. And that's not just the specimens in this facility. Once her signal reaches the surface." He didn't need to finish. We all understood the horrifying implications. Every living thing on Earth carried traces of their genetic material. Everything would be subject to the Queen's call. Another violent tremor shook the facility. Through the observation windows we could see the Queen's form expanding, tendrils of impossible geometry, reaching up through the layers of rock towards the surface. The temperature in the facility was rising rapidly as ancient machinery, dormant for millions of years, hummed to life. "There's a failsafe," Harrison said suddenly, pulling out an old keycard. The previous civilization built it into the facility's foundations, a way to trigger another ice age. But the price, he looked at each of us in turn. The price is everything. The sounds from outside were getting closer. The Queen's workers, now fully transformed, were systematically gathering everything biological in the facility. Soon they would reach us. "Make your choice quickly," Harrison said, holding out the key card. "We can try to escape, to warn the world, not that anyone would believe us in time. Or we can end it here, bury it all again like they did before. But this time we'll have to go deeper, make it colder, and hope the next civilization that finds it is better prepared than we were." The choice hung in the air between us as the facility crumbled around our heads, and the sound of skittering claws grew ever closer. The decision took seconds that felt like years. Around us, the facility was tearing itself apart as the Queen's influence spread. Through the reinforced windows, we could see her massive form continuing to shift and grow, each movement defying the laws of physics we thought we understood. "The failsafe," I said, reaching for the keycard. "How does it work?" Harrison's scarred face was grim. The previous civilization didn't just build a containment facility. They built a thermal inverter, a device capable of flash freezing everything within a 100-mile radius. But it requires fuel. Biological fuel, Rebecca realized, looking at the readouts. It converts living matter into energy. That's why all those people disappeared over the years. They weren't just victims. They were sacrifices, feeding the machine to keep it ready. The floor buckled beneath us as another tremor rocked the facility. On the security feeds, we could see the Queen's workers systematically sealing off escape routes, herding transformed creatures toward their ruler. "If we trigger it," Harrison said, "everyone in the facility dies. Their biological energy will power the freeze, but it has to be a conscious choice, a willing sacrifice. That's why they could never automate it. The system needs volunteers." A horrible screeching sound filled the air as something began cutting through the reinforced door. We had minutes, maybe less. "We're already dead if we don't," Torres said, checking his useless weapon. "Those things, they're not killing anyone. They're changing them, converting them." David nodded solemnly. "My grandmother's stories, they weren't just legends. They were warnings about what happens to those who get taken." The choice was made. We all knew it. The only question was, who would do it? Who would stay behind to activate the sequence while the others tried to escape with the evidence? "I'll do it," Harrison said quietly. "I've been here the longest. I've seen what's coming. I can't let it reach the surface." "No," I said, taking the keycard from him. "You have all the knowledge, all the background. They'll need you to explain everything when they find this place again." The door was beginning to glow red where something was burning through it. We could hear the chittering of the workers just outside. "James," Harrison started to protest, but I cut him off. "Get them out," I said. "Get the evidence out. Make sure the world knows what's buried here. Make sure the next time it wakes up, we're ready." Quick goodbyes. No time for anything else. They took the hard drives, the tablet, everything we'd discovered. Harrison showed them a maintenance shaft that led to the surface. Narrow but unguarded. As they disappeared into it, my old mentor turned back one last time. "When the ice melts again," he said, "we'll be back. We'll be ready." Then they were gone, and I was alone with the keycard and a console that would determine the fate of our world. The door finally gave way. The Queen's workers poured in, twisted, impossible shapes that had once been human. Behind them, through the observation window, I could see the Queen herself turn her attention toward me. The pressure of her alien consciousness pressed against my mind like a migraine. With shaking hands, I inserted the keycard. The console hummed to life, displaying a simple message. Initiate terminal freeze protocol. Warning, no survival possible within containment zone. I thought of the surface world above, of cities and people going about their lives, unaware of what lurked beneath their feet, of a warm world growing warmer, unknowingly rushing toward the perfect conditions for these creatures to reclaim their ancient dominion. As the workers reached for me with appendages that ignored the laws of biology, I pressed execute. The world turned white with cold. 3 months later, a satellite photo shows a perfect circle of ice in southern Alaska, hundreds of feet deep, centered on a point that doesn't appear on any official map. The temperature there never rises above freezing, defying all weather patterns and climate models. If you know where to look, if you know the right people to ask, you might find 4 survivors who carry evidence of what's buried there. They'll tell you about the thing in the cube, about the price of keeping it sleeping. They'll warn you that the ice won't last forever, and they'll tell you to remember these coordinates, because someday, when the world grows warm enough again, something ancient will stir beneath Alaska's ice, and this time we'll need to be ready.